Well, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Santa Barbara County Board of Education. It's our regular June meeting, and we're going to start today. That's the call to order. And we do have Spanish live simultaneous Spanish interpretation of the board meeting available for those on viewing online. And now, in honor of Flag Day, I'm expecting some wonderful words from Mr. Porter.
Well, thank you. Before you rise,
Yes, see, I knew it.
it is Flag Day, and that's certainly a big day, but another huge day this month is Juneteenth,
Mhm.
June 19th. But I would ask us to think about June 19th this way. The original Juneteenth was not the end of slavery in the United States. Slavery continued on for several more months in the Union states that had not seceded. Juneteenth really only applied to the Confederate states. So in the same way that Juneteenth was not the end of trying to end the scourge of slavery, even to this day, this Juneteenth is not the end of removing that scourge. So today, as we salute our flag, let us all pledge to one another once again that we continue to try to remove that stain from our country and all work hard to do the right thing. So please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, and now, Miss Friedland, would you like to do a roll call?
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores.
Here.
Mrs. Cardy.
Here.
Mrs. DeWord.
Here.
Ms. Ehrman.
Here.
Mrs. Frost.
Here.
Mr. Howell.
Here.
Mr. Porter.
And present.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't believe we have any changes to the agenda. Okay. And so now we will go to president and board comments. Board members, any comments? It's been a busy month. There's been scholarship events, there's been senior nights, there's been graduations, the culmination of the year for sure. But anyone have anything specific that they would like to bring to the floor? Michelle.
Yes, thank you. I attended the May 23rd education celebration in Solvang, and I just wanted to comment how it was a beautiful event and really well done, and it was, I think, everybody that was there celebrated really appreciated the event and being acknowledged. Also, I attended the State of the Vanderburg Space Force base with Susan, and that was a great, it was very interesting. It was the first time for me to be on base, and just a reminder, the CSBA annual conference for specifically for county board members is coming up, and right now it's the early bird special if you sign up. And the date of the conference in Monterey is September 13th through the 15th. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others?
Just a big congratulations to the parents of graduates in the room. I think
Yes.
it's a very formidable occasion. I was struck, and I was at the Santa Barbara High School graduation last night, that this is the class of COVID, and the absolute positivity that was emanating. Granted, everybody made it over the finish line and they were thrilled. I was there to celebrate the graduation of a young woman that I've been mentoring for the last almost 10 years, who had faced really, really difficult circumstances in her life, had very little in the way of a fighting chance. And she got through it, and she did it really well. And she won. Well, she was awarded a resilience silver cord, which was absolutely thrilling and a huge triumph for her dad and I. And I also went to quite a few, well, 3 different award ceremonies, and there I was just struck with the ingenuity and leadership that's coming out of our middle school and high school grades, and just a feeling that I hadn't seen before of hope in the future, which I hope and pray continues.
Any others? Okay, and I will ask if we have any public comments today. No, we have none. Then at this time, which it is 2:06, give or take, I am going to call closed section for the action item on the expulsion hearing. So if everyone that is not a part of that hearing, all the parties to the appeal are present. And this expulsion hearing will be heard in closed session. It's a hearing before the Santa Barbara County Board of Education, conducted pursuant to Ed Code sections 48919 through 48924 and Santa Barbara County Board of Education policy number 5144.3, copies of which are now entered into the record of these proceedings to hear the appeal of expulsion from school. I am calling us back to order in open session. The presentation. Yeah. And it is now 3:42, give or take. And I'm going to announce formally the decision that was made on expulsion hearing 24-1. The board decided on finding of facts that the district governing board did proceed within its jurisdiction, that the pupil was afforded a fair hearing, and there was no prejudicial abuse of discretion, and there is no relevant material which was not included. Motion was made by Mr. Peter Porter. I can't talk. Second by Mr. Howell, and the above findings of fact were called by a roll call vote unanimously. As far as the order of the board, the Santa Barbara County Board of Education affirmed the decision of the Lompoc Unified School District Governing Board to expel student E2401. And the motion was made by Mr. Howell and seconded by Mrs. Flores. And the above was adopted by a unanimous roll call vote. At this time, I am going to call maybe a 10-minute break. So we'll be back here at 3:55. So for the rest of our agenda. So break. Accountability Act by Associate Superintendent of Student and Community Services, Bridget Hoblitz.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam President. And I see that the slides are getting up at the moment. That is the next presentation. While our wonderful tech team is getting everything prepared, I wanted just to take this opportunity to introduce that today I have 3 colleagues with me who will be participating in this presentation. So you're all very familiar with Renee Wheeler, the director of our juvenile court schools, as well as Elise Simmons, who is the coordinator in the Student and Community Services Division, and Amy Willis, who serves as our director of Transitional Youth Services. So you may be wondering why all 3 of these ladies are with me today, but they've had a tremendous amount of time and energy have been poured into developing this year's LCAP. And I'm actually, for the first time, can say that this is the first year since the LCAP was developed in 2013 that I have not been the lead writer. So this wonderful trio here spent countless hours writing and developing the LCAP, and I thought it fitting that they also present with me today. So just to begin, sorry, I'm getting used to this new Donald. There it goes. Is it at the screen or where do I point? That's going, okay. So to begin, as we reflect on just this year, the past work that's been done, I wanted just to take a little bit of a look back. You'll recall in February, I came and presented to the board the mid-year update for the LCAP for the 23-24 school year. That was sort of a progress update as to where we were in terms of our actions and metrics and expenditures. And now today, okay. Today, you'll be looking at the packet that you have. The LCAP packet includes our annual update, so the full year's update for the 23-24 school year, as well as our new 3-year LCAP. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties for the 2024-27 school year. So we'll be looking at year one. This is a new 3-year plan, and it looks a little bit different than you have seen in the past. Next slide. The packet that you have includes 5 elements, and so I just wanted to break those down really quickly for you. The first element is the budget overview for parents. The second one is that 23-24 annual update, which accounts for all metrics where we landed in the year, as including expenditures. The 24-25 LCAP, again, that is our first year of a new 3-year plan. There are what we call contributing and expenditure action tables, which account for all the financials in the LCAP. And then finally, the instructions. As we take a look at the LCAP sort of broadly and look at the goals that are outlined, we have 3 broad goals. Goal 1 and 2 are focused specifically on our juvenile court and community schools. And goal 3 is focused on our foster youth services coordinating program under transitional youth services. Goal 4 is what's considered a maintenance goal. These are items that we've selected that we feel we are doing a wonderful job of, and we're just going to maintain those services. And then we have a new goal, which is considered a focus goal. And this is related to some equity multiplier funding that we are receiving. Specifically, this goal is targeting support for the lowest performance of a subgroup on the dashboard. And for our court schools, this happens to be the suspension rate for Hispanic and Latino students. So all of the actions and the goal itself are specifically targeted to improve services for that group. At this point, we're going to move into the LCAP development process, and Elise Simmons is going to come on up.
Good afternoon, board. So I'm here to talk about the process. And so let's see, we're going to talk about the entire development process. You'll see there's 4 steps. The first one begins with analysis and evaluation. And again, as Bridget shared, this is a unique year where we're wrapping up a 3-year with an annual update, and we're beginning a brand new 3-year. And so we looked back as we analyzed and evaluated, we looked back at 3 years of metrics. We also spent a lot of time, I'll talk a little bit about it in a minute, about gathering educational partner feedback. Very many meetings and formal and informal events happened. With the analysis and the feedback we received, we were able then to sit down and talk about new goals, maybe some revised actions, new actions, metrics, and even expected outcomes. So because it's a new 3-year cycle, we had to update and evaluate where do we expect our students to be in 3 years. And then, of course, through it all, the budget. So in the annual update, we reported and reflected the actual expenditures, and then we also included some new expenditures, including our increased and improved services for unduplicated students. I want to look a little bit closer at the annual update because this is where we spent a lot of time analyzing and evaluating. The annual update provided a really strong foundation for us to then look forward. So as we looked back, we also then prepared for looking forward. So again, we analyzed our progress. We looked back at the 3 years of metrics. We looked for successes. We identified areas of growth or need. We asked a lot of questions. Are there improvements? What challenges did we have? Do we need more time to implement our actions? Are there other things that we should be doing differently? And then we evaluated our actions. So sometimes we were like, let's keep this action, it's working, or we need to revise it a little bit. Or this one doesn't seem to be working well, let's do something different. And when I keep saying we were doing this with our educational partners as well as the LCAP writing team. So speaking of educational partners, there's an extensive amount of meetings. This slide doesn't even touch this is the tip of the iceberg. And you'll see in the LCAP itself, there was, I should have counted, but I'm going to guess hundreds of meetings that we had throughout the year. Some of them specifically about the LCAP, other times just an opportunity to gather input and feedback. We grouped these here. These are just some highlights on students and staff. Spent a lot of time with students. I'll talk about that in a moment. Staff, weekly meetings. JCCS does an excellent job meeting weekly. And in those meetings, talking about how are things going? What should we do differently? Connecting with our special education and SELPA partners, the leadership team at JCCS, bargaining units, mental health staff, CTE director and coordinator, and then the list goes on in the LCAP itself. For parents and community partners, again, gathering from parents and guardians through surveys, conferences, phone calls. We got our school site council, probation administration staff, district partners. And then we have these two other groups, special serve groups that are outside of JCCS, and that's the Transitional Youth Services, which you'll hear from Amy about what her committee advice and input they gave to her and how it informed the plan. And then expelled youth, which you'll hear about later today. There's a triennial expelled youth plan that also informed our plan. And that was bringing together district leaders and charter school leaders to get input for them to write that plan, but also you'll see that in the LCAP. So lots of work around gathering input and specifically taking it to then inform our actions and our metrics moving forward. And I just wanted to center students. I think the LCAP is all about students and how we are serving them. And so we're really proud of the work we did to make sure we centered student voices in this LCAP moving forward. Empathy interviews were conducted. If you don't know about what those are one-on-ones, and they're really just about getting down to the student level and really understanding from their perspective how they're experiencing school. And in this case, this was Fitzgerald, and it was students that had just met their expulsion terms and they were headed back to their home school. And so we wanted to capture, how was Fitzgerald? What great things did you experience? What did you wish you had? Things like that. Focus groups, extensive focus groups. These were groups of 2 to 4 students, again, asking questions, much like empathy interviews, but just a little bit bigger in size. Local surveys, we asked them all different questions, and then that are similar to the California Healthy Kids Survey, which we have to do, but local surveys, again, allow us to ask those questions that we're really curious about to get more input. And then the Transitional Youth Services, site liaison spoke to foster youth as well. So sort of like an empathy interview or a one-on-one interview, we also did that to, again, center student voices, because it is really about them. And one of my favorite quotes always is, nothing about me without me. And so I think this is a way for us to really make sure that our LCAP reflects what our students need. So I'm going to turn it over now to Renee Wheeler, who will talk to you all about JCCS. Take it all. Take the whole thing. Take everything. All right. Hello.
Hi. All right, so now we get to the fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do. And I would like to start with the highlight of our successes. And I have to catch up with the notes. All right. So as we talked about, this is a 3-year plan. And so when we look back over what were we able to accomplish in those 3 years? And The big one was we became WASC accredited, which allows us to do lots more wonderful things for our students. And the big one of that is we can register our courses to be A through G approved in the portal to help our students become prepared. And we also have been working with our CTE program to bolster it. And we are very proud that we have been able to see an increase year over year of our students that have been enrolled in a CTE course. And we were at 67.5% in 22-23. And then this year we were at 80.2% of our students were enrolled in a CTE course. And so we're very proud of that. And so we are going to continue, of course, to flesh that program out and so that we can strengthen our offerings for our students. And then we have our content proficiency in English. And we administer the CASP to our students 3rd through 8th grade, and then again in the 11th grade year. But specifically for court schools, that tends to be 7th and 8th graders, and then 11th graders. And we were able to have 32% of our students meet or nearly meet or meet this standard in ELA. So we are slowly chipping away at that as well. And we do that we have a English language arts work group, and we meet 6 times a year to create unit plans to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're teaching everything at the same time and that we're just aligned and calibrated in our ELA program. And then lastly, our parent guardian engagement. We do a lot to bring our parents in, and we provide them education, and then we also ask for their input. And this year we were able to increase to 86.7% of our parents um, uh, were able to work with us, and we are able to partner with the Promotor Network to further our outreach to parents and to encourage them to participate. And our metrics show that we have consistently maintained 100% of our parents participate in their students' IEP process, which is very encouraging. And so we are just going to continue our outreach and to increase upon that. And then, of course, there's always areas of identified need, right? There's always things that we want to work on and improve. And on the top of that list is our math proficiency. And we have previously spoken in our LCAP about our students come to us with significant deficits in algebra. And that means they lack the foundational skills of analysis, synthesis, problem solving, and to perform complex tasks. And so to meet this need, we have a math work group. And we have met with our math work group continuously throughout the year. And earlier this year, Lauren Aranguin and I spoke about the work that we have done with this group. And we also have embedded intervention into our math program so that we can continue to help our students with their test taking skills, those foundational skills, and their mathematical practices. And our English learners, we also have a higher than average rate of English learners in our program. And this year we were able to redesignate 2% of our students to become as fluent English proficient. And part of that reason is our students need to score, well, all students, not just ours, but all students in California have to score a 4 on the LPAC in order to be redesignated. And we have a high percentage of long-term English learners. That means they have been an English learner for 5 years or more. And that's 92.3% of our EL students are considered long-term. And the county average is 25%, to kind of put that into perspective. And and then of course, all tests become more difficult as you progress up through the grade level. So that includes the LPAC, it gets more difficult. And so our analysis reveals that we have had improvement in our LPAC scores over time. And of the students that took the LPAC with us for 2 consecutive cycles, there was a level increase of 37.5% in 1920, the 2019-2020 school year. And then in 2021-22, we were able to increase that to 60%. So they're making progress. We're just, kind of struggling getting them over the finish line. And then our suspension rate. We talked a little bit last year about the pattern of volatility that we've had at our juvenile hall with the difference in crimes and the change in the laws there. And additionally, the majority of students who are referred to Fitzgerald this year were referred for fighting. And that also is very volatile in our population. And so we did see an increase, unfortunately, this year of 20. Let me rephrase that. So last year was 2.7%, which we are very proud of, which is below the county average. And then it did increase to 20.1% this year. Yes.
So is this a suspension rate for the students who are at Fitzgerald?
And the court school and Dos Cruces.
So we can suspend students from Fitzgerald who are here because they've been expelled from their schools.
Right. So
Oh
suspension is just 1 to 2 days,
Oh.
right? Where expulsion is,
Long
for
term.
school
Okay,
for the whole term. Yeah. So,
okay.
but yeah, so that is something that we are working towards. But we have identified several promising strategies that we began to incorporate this year, and we're going to build and strengthen next year to engage them in their learning so that they will be less likely to engage in these behaviors. And so we're going to focus on professional development, creating opportunities for students to lead clubs and engage in campus beautification. We have plans to create a calming space for students on campus, and we are going to utilize a coordinator to help support with the implementation of progressive discipline that includes more restorative practices. So we have plans. And then the highlight of goal 1 is that our goal is all students will demonstrate proficiency of grade level content standards and will be prepared for college and or career. And this covers 4 state priority areas, 2, 4, 7, and 8. And so the priority area 2 is state standards. Priority area 4 is pupil achievement. Priority area 7 is course access. And priority area 8 is pupil outcomes. And so goal 1 is aimed at improving academic achievement, meeting the needs of students with disabilities and English learners, preparing students for college and careers. These actions focus on improving student achievement on the CAS, testing, providing credit recovery and intervention for students, offering A through G courses, and expanding our CTE program. So goal 1 is really the most intense. And if you've read through the LCAP, goal 1 is like the beast, right? Once you get through goal 1, it's easy to read the rest of it. And then LCAP, our goal 2.
If I could interrupt just for a second, Mr. Torres, could I call on you to close that blind? I'm being blinded by the light up here. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was I apologize.
So goal 2 states that in collaboration with state and with staff and the community, students and families will be provided with services to address individual needs and support students in overcoming barriers impacting their education. And this covers 3 priority areas. Priority area 3 is parent involvement and family engagement. Priority area 5 is pupil engagement. And then the 6th area is school climate. Goal 2 is aimed at improving school climate, student and parent engagement, and providing supports for students and families. Our actions in goal 2 focus on providing counseling services, behavioral health supports and training, and increasing parent engagement through parent outreach and ongoing communication. So as promised, goal 2 went much faster. Goal 4 is continue to successfully implement programs that support basic conditions for learning. And this is priority area 1 and the expelled youth priority area 9. So goal 4 is designed to maintain progress in the state priorities not addressed in other goals. Specifically, this goal is aimed at maintaining progress on state priorities 1 and 10. Priority 1 is focused on basic conditions of learning, and we use the Williams report. And state priority 9 is the coordination of instruction for expelled youth. And these are required by county offices of education to report in their LCAP. Actions focus on the maintaining a robust base program for JCCS students and countywide services for expelled youth. So this is our maintenance goal. And then goal 5 is the new goal that Bridget mentioned earlier on slide 5. This year, we have added a focus goal for the new equity multiplier funds. So our goal is that within 3 years, JCCS will reduce rates of suspension for Hispanic and Latino students by implementing actions that promote relationships, student connectedness, and student voice. And this is priority area 6. Which is school climate. And this was based on the lowest performance on the school dashboard and specifically for the school suspension rate at our court schools. And some of the actions we've identified are actions focused on utilizing restorative approaches, creating calming spaces for students when they're elevated, and student-led beautification projects, as well as implementing a student onboarding process so that they have that one-to-one connection from day 1 when they enter one of our schools. And then we are also required to show increased and improved services that are above and beyond our base program. And so that we focus, these are specifically targets that support our services for English learners, foster youth, and socially economically disadvantaged students. It's a mouthful. Currently, 100% of our JCCS students are considered unduplicated and fall into at least one of these categories. In developing a plan to meet the needs of our unduplicated students, we focused on providing 7 additional supports and services that are above our base program. And these include the academic support, which are our intervention in Let's Go Learn program, our community outreach and career counselor, who will support students with transitions, course enrollment, and conflict resolution, teacher-student ratios, because we have learned that smaller class sizes provide greater one-on-one and small group instruction. 4 is parent engagement events, and we will continue, I should say, to utilize the Promotoris network to help us with our outreach and engage with our parents. Number 5 is translation services. And I am very fortunate that I have many bilingual staff that can speak to families in both English and Spanish. And we have behavioral health counselors, and we partner with Family Service Agency and CADA, the Council on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, to provide a substance use disorder counselor and a mental health / social worker to help our students deal with their issues. And the behavioral support security staff. So we now have security staff on site at Fitzgerald 7 hours a day to oversee and intervene as necessary before, during, and after school hours. So now I am going to turn it over to Amy Willits.
Oh, before you go, if I may, Madam President, I am. So as you commented earlier, and we've had discussions before about the changed nature of a typical student that we have in our court school, not community school. So we'll have these students for longer periods of time
Yes.
because they're there for more and bigger, more important and bigger offenses.
Mhm.
How does that change our approach to educating them now that we have, instead of having for a few weeks or a couple of months, now you have them for extended periods of time? So we can actually do things that make adjustments and hopefully create success. How is that reflected in the LCAP that we can do that kind of thing?
Well, I'm going to point back to something that Elise said earlier about the hundreds of meetings that we've had, because this is a hot topic of discussion is, now that our student population has changed, how are we going to change to meet their needs? And the start of that is forming those relationships, getting to know them, really diving into the assessment to see where those educational gaps are so that we can start to fill in those gaps so we can bring them up to grade level and then hopefully beyond grade level. And we have also formed a really, I want to say, tight relationship with Alan Hancock and the Rising Scholars Program so that we can start to move them into higher education and look into college courses that can either be dual enrolled while they're still in high school, and definitely now that they are going to be there longer, we want to make sure that they continue their education beyond their high school diploma.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
An opportunity.
Yes, right? Always when a door
Yeah.
closes, another one opens.
I haven't gotten to come to one of these meetings before. So as Bridget shared, I'm Amy Willis. I'm the Director of Transitional Youth Services. And in a couple of weeks, I'll be celebrating my first year here with the county. Before I show you I only have one slide. Transitional Youth Services only has one slide. But I wanted to make sure before I advance to that slide, I just let you know that in this last year, I think one of the most powerful things I was a part of was writing this LCAP with the help of Elise and one of the staff members for Transitional Youth Services who covers data. This process was powerful because we got to dive into the statistics that exist about our foster youth, look deeper at them, and really select a goal that we think we can impact and that has meaning and relevance. And I really appreciated this process. Also, it just so happened that this was a year where I was grant writing. And so I wrote the grant for our FYSCP, our foster side of we also do homelessness, the foster side of our program. And I was able to work with Elise and work on the LCAP while aligning it to what I was writing in the grant too. So I feel like moving forward, as I gain experience, we really have a chance of making a difference because we're all on the same page. So I come into this role from 20 years in the classroom as a teacher. And it was interesting as I was reading through the LCAP and feeling so proud of all of the things that have been done here. I was thinking about how much this role, although very different than being a classroom teacher, at its core is really similar. Some of the things that come up, and you'll see this as we look deeper at this goal, it's completely data driven. And, as a classroom teacher, everything you do needs to be informed by data. So we started this process by looking at the data. Where do we stand and where do we want to go and how are we going to get there? So very, very parallel to the work that I did as a teacher. Something else that you realize probably in your first year of teaching is that you can't do this alone. And I realized that very quickly in this role as well, that you need as many collaborators as possible. And so whether it's, community-based organizations, it's the social workers, it's the probation department, whoever's in all of those meetings that I go to, we work together and we share this information and we work on finding ways to best meet the needs of these foster youth. So just like in a classroom, you need to be able to rely on other people to build a support network for the student. In transitional youth services, we rely on so many stakeholders to help us with this. And you'll see collaboration, collaboration, collaboration all over our goal. And then finally, and probably most importantly, what you learn as a teacher, and in this position as well, is that the most important thing is relationships. And those collaborations, they build the support network, but our goal is to strengthen it. And I think the way we're going to strengthen the support network for our foster youth is to build relationships, to really understand who our stakeholders are, to figure out how we all fit together and can form this net of support that's really strong for our foster youth. So very similar to in a classroom. You can start out building rapport with your students, but until you really get to know them, you don't have a relationship and you're not going to go as far. So I feel very hopeful about all of the thought that went into this. So as you can see that our goal here is not just a system of support, but it's to strengthen that system of support that addresses the barriers that come through in the data as being most glaringly inequitable. So strengthening the system of support that will lead to reduced suspension rates, improved attendance, and increased graduation rate. All of these, if you look at the data, it doesn't look good for our fall. So we started there. And how are we going to do this? Collaboration, 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 with our interagency collaboration, with our collaboration with our districts. I don't know if you're all aware that we work very closely with liaisons who work with the foster youth, boots on the ground on the campuses. And we meet with them every month and sometimes more. And so strengthening those relationships with those people, really getting to know them and how they approach their work, creating some best practices that can be shared for everybody, that's going to make a huge difference to our foster youth. And then finally, the collaboration within our own department. There's been a lot of change in laws, a lot of change in staff, a lot of change in expectations. And so just us kind of figuring out what we all do and how we work together to brighten the future for these students. And that's our transitional youth services mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. We have just a couple more slides. And so I will finish this off here, specifically around the budget. So the budget is one of the last parts of the LCAP. And there's 3 parts, or really 4 parts listed here. The first one is that for that annual update, we calculate and report out our estimated expenditures for the 23-24 school year. And then we allocate funding for new expenditures in the 24-25 school year. And then finally, we look at our increased and improved services for those unduplicated students. Something to note as you look through those financials is that last year, we actually received an increase in the number that we, or the amount that we had allocated for supplemental and concentration funding based on those new funds that came through that everyone advocated for. So for our juvenile court and community schools. And so for the first time, we're showing a carryover. We went up to about, I have it here in my notes, I think it was 593,000 roughly is what we ended up, or 523,000, excuse me, from just under $300,000. So that was an increase in supplemental and concentration funding of about $223,000. So we were able to account for some unplanned expenses in this year's annual update, but we did end up with a carryover amount of just about $164,000. So you'll see as we look at this next slide, some numbers that show some dramatic increases. And so I wanted you to be aware of those changes. So the first set there in blue is looking at our estimated actuals for 23-24. Our base program was just about $3.1 million. And then the increased and improved services allocation that we spent was $359,485.05. And then for 24-25, we're looking at including those new equity multiplier funds, which is just about $170,000. We're looking at about $3.5 million for that's allocated here in the LCAP, and then an increased and improved services amount of $593,854.41. So you'll see that carryover amount is also included in the 24-25 budget allocation. That is almost the last slide. The last slide here is that we have a board meeting, as you all know, next week. And so there will be 3 things coming forward, or 3 items coming forward for the board as items that are related to the LCAP. So we'll be presenting, or I'll be presenting on the local indicators, which are related to the priorities. We'll also bringing, for the first time in several years, a revised LCAP federal addendum. This is a informational item for the board that you'll see next week. And it is aligning this new 3-year plan to that federal addendum and accounts for federal funding that we received Title 1D and Title 2 Part A. And then you'll be also receive the LCAP for board adoption at next week's meeting. So that concludes our presentation, and I will say thank you and ask if there are any questions today. I think we have a public hearing next, so.
Any questions by the board? Hearing none? Yes.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you and your team again for compiling all of this information, all of the work that you did to put into this report, but then just all the work that you're doing to make this work and to make these programs continue for our youth. So you can just see the dedication and the focus on centering youth. I love the quote, nothing about me without me. I've never heard that before. So I'm like, oh, let me write that down. And just also like the collaboration, the emphasis on relationships. I just really appreciate your efforts and all the work that you put into the report. So thank you.
Thank you so much. You have a great.
Any other comments? No. Then at
Okay.
this time, I will call the public hearing on the Santa Barbara County Education Office LCAP to order. Are there any public here that need to be heard on LCAP? How long do I have to?
No public comment.
No public comment. Then I hereby call the public hearing closed, and we will move forward now to the budget presentation. Yay! We have the presentation of the 2024-25 County School Service Fund budget. And the budget committee has already had a preview of this. And that includes myself, Michelle, and Vita. And we all unanimously agreed that for this to come forward to the board for favorable consideration. That's the same thing. So Associate Superintendent of Administrative Services, Mr. Steve Torres, and Blind Closer will provide a presentation to the board of the 24-25 School Service Fund budget.
Great. Thank
You're
you.
on.
Thank you. And good afternoon. I will be presenting the 24-25 proposed adopted budget. I'd like to begin by thanking the board for your consideration today, and a special thanks to our board budget committee, Ms. Frost, Ms. Alvarez Flores, and Ms. DeWard for the time, as well as your input and perspective during our meeting. It really helps to inform the work that we do and the presentation of materials that we provide. Another special thanks to our SBCO fiscal team, led by Nicole Evenson, our Administrator of Internal Services, as well as Araceli Vasquez and Patrice Nelson. The time and energy and expertise that they put into crafting this budget, I can't say enough about the work that they do. And we all know that this budget process is year-long. So not just for what we have in front of us today, but as well as monitoring and maintaining this throughout the year. This year, we're going to include a different portion into the presentation. It's an overview of COE budgets. And the idea behind this is that we give a little bit of context and a little bit of background on COE budgets just prior to presenting the actual 24-25 proposed budget. So you'll see some new information here, and I'll kind of walk through a little bit about county education office budgets. I'm starting with the timeline. We know the adopted budget that we'll be reviewing today and hopefully adopting next week begins our budget process. Throughout the year, there's two reporting periods. First interim in December and second interim in March. And then that process wraps up not until the fall of 2025 when we actually complete our unaudited actuals and close our books on this 24-25 budget. A little bit on the input that goes into each of these budget periods, what determines our revenue projections and our expenditure projections. In this current budget that we're looking at, our adopted budget here, we start in January by looking at information that's released in the governor's proposed budget, and we start to build our budget and our budget models at that time. When the May revision comes around, we do have some time with certain portions of our budget models, to be able to update them with that information. Unfortunately, some of the modeling has to take place before then, so we actually still carry forward some of the January proposal information. We also look at our principal apportionment reporting that our districts and charters complete. That provides us with data and calculations of estimated state funding, and that uses ADA and local property tax data. And that information we're using from P2, which happens to be around March or April. So we're plugging that in to help us estimate our revenue. On the expenditure side, we have individual meetings with all of our managers. We talk about their plans for the upcoming years, planned expenditures. And then we also look at our estimated actuals, which allows us to look at what we spent this year, where we are at this point in the year of spending, and what that looks like in continuation for the upcoming year. At first interim, at that point, the budget's been enacted, so we're able to take the actual budget, plug in those numbers to update our revenue. And districts and charters have completed their principal apportionment reporting for the previous year, for 23-24, and we're able to plug that new data and that calculations into our revenue projections. On the expenditure side, we look at our spending through the month of October to update where we are in terms of our expenditures. And as we move to second interim, we still have that enacted budget data, so that doesn't change. But there is updates from the first half of the year, districts and charters reporting on their principal apportionment. Again, that's property tax and attendance data. And then on the expenditure sides, we meet with our managers again to talk about where they are in their spending for the year, if there's any significant changes in plans, so we can adjust expenditures accordingly. And that includes our expenditures through the month of January. On the unaudited actuals, when we close our books, we've had all of our principal apportionment reporting for the year, so we're able to plug in the actuals at that point, and then we're able to close our books, and we have our spending through the month of July. So just wanted to revisit this timeline so we see all the various factors throughout the year that impact this budget, which we're just proposing at this time. Another thing we wanted to look at was the differences between COE and district budgets. We know there's differences. It's important to revisit this from time to time because it does present a background to the budget that we're going to look at shortly here. From the county office side, a small percentage of our funding is unrestricted. That'll be best represented when we look at the charts and graphs in the budget, and we'll see the significant portion of our funding that is in special education and early childhood and education, which are restricted fundings. On the district side, the majority of their funding is unrestricted. It comes through LCFF, which is largely unrestricted and based on the populations that they serve. Because this is based on the number of students that they serve, and that's the primary focus of the work, there are a majority of their expenses are spent on staff, and that staff is typically working mostly directly with students. We know at the county office side, we do a lot of provide a lot of support to our districts, do a lot of work for and services to the community. And so we have multiple management positions that lead that work and oversee that work. And then lastly there at the COE, we also have many fees for service. We have pass-through dollars for contracted work, excess cost billing for programs, things like that. Oops. And I mentioned the local control funding formula for districts and how that's based on the students and the populations that they serve. On the COE side, we have kind of four major components of our LCFF. The first is the operations grant, and that provides funding for our general operations as well as our legislated oversight responsibilities of our districts. And that tends to be mainly on the fiscal side. You'll hear us reference AB 1200 often, and that's the monitoring of districts' fiscal components. We also have funding for LEA support, and that's to fund activities that we do to support districts and charter development of their LCAPs, as well as the activities associated with our districts that are eligible and charters that are eligible for differentiated assistance. And then our alternative education grant, we talked about, you heard a little bit about it in the LCAP portion. We talked about this last year, the change in funding, in the funding model that was designed to more appropriately fund our alternative education programs, our juvenile and court and community schools. We know that that funding doesn't completely fund the programs as they are, but it does include with the last box there, the base grant funding. It's additional funding for just having one court school and one community school. And then we know in terms of the calculation of this funding, there's kind of a 3-year average model now for the ADA component of it. So that all contributes to our local control funding formula. And then the exception to LCFF, and kind of here we have a depiction of districts that are funded under LCFF. Their local property taxes don't meet the LCFF entitlement level. And so in those cases, state taxes or state aid is used to bridge that difference between the entitlement and the local property taxes. We also have our community funded basic aid. They're also known as basic aid districts, and their local property taxes exceed the LCFF entitlement. In those cases, the districts are able to keep that money. As we shared in the past, COEs do not have that entitlement. In 2014, it was determined that the excess property taxes from COEs would be returned to the state to operate court. I mentioned the difference in us having a significant number of restricted funding versus unrestricted. Here's an example of some of those funds. Federal revenues, the different title programs, special education, child nutrition, Medi-Cal administrative activities. Some of the one-time funding as restricted use, our child development funds, and then some programs like CTE. So those are all the different types of funds that have designated uses and very specific restrictions on the spending. And then on the unrestricted side, our LCFF, our lottery, and our education protection account are some examples.
Yeah, just real quick, shoot from the hip. A lot of citizens think that people like us get millions of dollars out of the lottery. How much would you say the county education office gets from the lottery?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll look quickly to Nicole to see if she has that number offhand. It's not a large amount. It's definitely not a lot.
Are you able to just give me a order of magnitude in the thousands, in the tens of thousands, in the millions? Thank you.
So the 100,000 range. Thank you. And then lastly, another factor that impacts our budget is the increased costs and employer contributions. So this is an example of contributions to employee pensions. And we see the large percentage that's there. These percentages and other increased costs, including health and benefits, property and liability insurance, and just other services and products, those increases, the rates of those increases tend to outpace our cost of living increase. So just another factor that impacts our budget on a year-to-year basis. Okay, and that's kind of the background information, that overview of the COE budget. So now I'll jump into our 24-25 proposed adopted budget. And I'll begin that with an overview of the state budget. The May revision included an overwide state budget deficit of about 27.6 billion. Now that's being mitigated mainly through the use of reserve funds, as well as reductions and delays in funding. So while there's a deficit, there's these solutions that are being used to kind of bridge that gap. And again, that's our overall budget. The Prop 98 guarantee at the May revise, we did see with an additional reduction of 3.5 billion. The same solutions are being used to mitigate that gap, mainly the use of reserves. You may have heard that there has been negotiations between the governor and K-12 education groups about how that gap is mitigated. So both sides were committed to fully funding the Prop 98 guarantee, but the means in which we did that was kind of negotiated. So that was kind of a recent development in early June. The COLA went up to 1.07 from the original January of 0.76. And so that COLA is applied to LCFF as well as some of the other education or categorical programs. And then lastly, While, the budget has not yet been enacted, so we continue to monitor negotiations with the legislature in terms of any changes from what happened from May revise to what's enacted at the end of this month. So as we start to head into the actual budget, our actual 24-25 proposed budget, we'll give some overview of some of the revenue changes. And so revenue increases, we'll see in the slides that we'll show a little bit ahead here, that there's a total increase of about 1.4 million, and you'll see that the majority of that is from the Child Development Fund. Some of the assumptions that are impacting those revenue increases is we plugged in because when our budget models were developed, the May revise had not been released yet, so we still use the 0.76% COLA from the January budget. We removed expired one-time, mostly COVID-associated federal and state and local grants. So those have kind of been on a cycle of expiration for the last couple of years, and they carry out even a couple more years. So on an annual basis, we have some of those phasing out. We decreased funding for differentiated assistance. So we look at a 3-year average because that's how it's funded in terms of the money we receive to support differentiated assistance. So we just take that 3-year average and plug it in. That was less than what we were at last year. And then the transfer of property taxes in excess of LCFS. On the expenditure side, we'll see an increase of about 3.8 million, and you see the breakout from unrestricted general fund, restricted and child development fund. Some of the factors or the assumptions that are impacting those changes in expenditures is we included a preliminary 7% increase for all staff. So again, in our budget models, at the time that we plugged in or had to plug in order to complete the budget in a timely manner and give managers the time to be able to input the information that they have, we had not settled negotiations yet. So we put in a preliminary of 7% increase for all staff. At that same time, we also didn't have our final health and benefits rates increase for the year. So we plugged in, and for pension costs, we went and plugged in our best estimate at that time. We reduced expenditures associated with the one-time grants that were expiring. And then we've had a lot of conversations around facilities needs, facilities improvements, and those are all planned in next year's budgets. Those just don't appear. Those will appear in the maintenance and facilities fund, not in the portion that's being presented. So now we'll jump into the breakout of our expenditures. So on this particular, and we have about four tables here, and we'll look at our expenditures in each of these different areas. But like I mentioned, with the restricted funding, you see that 79% of our expenditures have to do with student support. So most of those funds are restricted. Most of those have to do with ECE and special education. And then you'll see the breakout of district and school support at 13%. And then I believe we're at 3% in the yellow there, and then 5% for excess property tax. So those percentages haven't changed, much kind of from year to year. What we did see this year was a slight increase in student support and a slight decrease in the internal services component. And so we'll focus on the 16% that is our internal support and our school and district support. Our internal support is essentially our overhead, fiscal services, internal services, and maintenance and operations. And then the district and student support services, that is the LCAP support, differentiated assistance, our credentialing programs, and you'll see all that as part of the 13%. And then the 79% that makes up our student support services, that's starting with the blue, our early childhood, our early care and education programs, special education, and then our other services include our JCCS, our career tech, and then our other programs, including Partners in Education, Children's Creative Project, and Child and Family Resource Services. And then on our last graph here, or our last graph here, we've essentially kind of broken out the actual expenditures themselves. So you'll see a total expenditures of almost 148 million. And then following the percentages that I covered in the previous slides, you'll see how that breakout in cost goes amongst the different areas. And now we'll transition to looking at each of these funds kind of individually, comparing last year or this year's estimated actuals to what we've proposed and what we are proposing for the 24-25 budget. So this first one is combined our general fund and our child development fund. So the value in this chart is you could see that in gray, the third row down, the expense, that's that almost 148 million that you saw on the previous table. And so here, estimated actuals, we show a beginning balance of 29.2 million. And our revenue and expenses, there was a difference of almost 4 million. And we end up with an ending balance of $33.2 million from our estimated actuals. So we begin our proposed budget with that beginning balance. And you'll see here essentially almost another $2 million difference from revenue to expenses. And we end up with an ending balance of almost 35 million. So again, the value, as you can see, the total here, but in our next couple tables, we'll break out each individual fund, which will give us a little bit more detail of what's happening. So I'll begin with the general fund restricted programs, and I think I might have skipped. Yes, okay. And the unrestricted programs, I'll start there. You'll see our unrestricted programs, we always try and focus, spend the unrestricted funds first because they're very limited in what you can do. So what you see here, when you see the variance between the revenue expenses in the current proposed budget year, you'll see that our revenue is around 30,632,000, and our expenses are around 28,411,000. And you'll see that ending balance grow there to the number that's covered up. And on the restricted side, you'll see a little bit more of a closer balance between expense and revenue, again, because these are restricted funds. We want to spend these accordingly. And so from revenue, and I'm in the second column or the third column, the final column, you'll see the revenue at about 55.1 million, expenditures slightly above that at or about $1.5 million above that, and you see a decrease in ending balance. And again, when you see that, you're looking at kind of contributions from the unrestricted side. And then lastly, the Child Development Fund. We'll see a slight increase in revenue there of about 1.5 million. And then you'll see the expenses, and again, very close in relation, and the ending balance drops just slightly. And then lastly, the other component that we look at in our budget to see how we're doing and how we're projecting is our multi-year projection. And what that takes into account is the budget year, which is 24-25 next year, and the 2 following years. And so you'll see there that we're pretty consistent with a healthy reserve in all 3 years. The one thing to note is in years 2 and 3, because of when we do basically the multi-year projection modeling at the very end. So we were able to add the agreed upon or contracted 4% increases in years 2 and 3. So those are included in our multi-year projections. And again, we've stayed consistent around that 27%, which is a healthy reserve. So that concludes my presentation of the proposed adopted budget. Are there any questions?
Just a comment, thank you for this, and thanks to the budget committee, who I know did a deep dive on this.
Yeah, this is the results of our work.
Represents a ton of work, and explanation was really good. Thank you.
Yes. No, you did an excellent job, but we already told you that. So.
Well, then I'll thank you once again for your consideration, and again, thanks to our fiscal team for all their hard work on this project.
Good job. All right, I'll hereby open our public hearing on the County School Service Fund budget. Public hearing is open, and I don't think we have any public.
No public comment.
So there's no public comment. I will hereby close the public hearing on public comment for the budget. And now we will go to Susan for the superintendent's report.
Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. I would like to start by seeing if there's any questions or comments on the report that I submitted. I would prefer to just have a couple extra talking points outside of the report today. Just want to see if there's anything that you have questions about. All right, well then I'd love to add just two comments and invite Kirsten Escobedo to say a portion of what I'm wanting to share with you. But first, since last month, as you can see in the information items to follow, so pleased that we have concluded our negotiations for the next 3 years, starting next year as year one. So a huge thanks to the many, many individuals in this room, but also not here represented today, who serve on the negotiations teams, which is a really important, really productive, collaborative process that all focuses on the same thing, which is to ensure that our employees are well served to serve are some of the most vulnerable youth within our county. So very, very pleased with that. You heard that as Steve Torres was just sharing with the budget, the assumption at the time of that adopted budget was a 7% increase for next year. It actually landed at an 8% increase for next year, with year two being 4% and then year three being 4%, with some changes to the benefits models as well. So we're moving forward with the implementation, huge shifts to payroll and benefits and making sure that everything can be in place by the time July 1st comes around. So a lot of thanks and hard work and appreciation. So wanted you to know. The second piece is just information I received yesterday from Lompoc Unified School District, and just wanted to give you the background really as a more of a heads up and awareness. Oftentimes you hear from individuals that serve within regions of our county. Special education is an area that you just saw how a huge portion of our work is in special education. And as a reminder, and I know that you know this, but I'll just say, we serve when our districts, as districts, request our services. That's how special education goes. And we're just super pleased to provide those services. And then when districts make a decision to take back their programs, oftentimes it's because they'd like to serve students within their own districts. We get a year and a day notification. And so sometimes districts will change their mind within that year and sometimes they don't. But within the year, we're still committed to serve. And then we're also very committed to a transition process, and it affects many, many families, employees, and children. So this one is a big one. And so I wanted to make sure that you knew about it, just in case you hear about it. And again, it's at a preliminary stage of just having a year and a day notice. So Kirsten Escobedo, thank you so much for being here and sharing a little bit about it so that we're all aware. Yeah, thank you. So
how's that? Shall I start again? All right. So as Susan said, we provide services on behalf of districts, and that's done in three main areas. One is our direct service districts. The second area is our early start program, so that's our infants. And then the third is our regional programs. And we have a variety of regional programs throughout the county that we provide on behalf of students for districts. And one of our, as you know, our largest regional program is preschool. And the year and a day letters that we received yesterday from Lompoc Unified are their request to transition back the preschool program to be served as a district program starting in the 25-26 school year. So as Susan said, over the next year, we work very closely with Lompoc Unified to help them develop their plan to serve these students, and also what that means for the families of the students in the programs, as well as our staff. We expect that this will affect between 40 and 50 staff members, either in full or in part. And so, as you might imagine, they have questions related to this, and so we're answering those questions with them as we can, and then working really closely with Lompoc to be able to provide, the information that they need going forward, as well as the families. Any questions? Yes.
Go ahead.
Just preschool. This isn't K through 12,
Correct.
But we do provide services K through 12.
For, we do, for Lompoc, the services that we provide are preschool. As well as outside of the preschool program, we have 3 other classes, which we call extensive support needs classes. We have 2 at the elementary level, and then 1 at the high school level. In total, those 3 classes serve about 30 students, between 25 and 30 students. And as you're aware from the superintendent's report, which has the preschool numbers, the preschool numbers are much more significant than that. It's several hundred students. So that's why this is a bigger transfer request, program transfer request. That's across all of our programs, Lompoc, Orchid, Santa Maria Bonita, and the San Ynez Valley Consortium.
Kirsten, is there a chance that Lompoc might retain or employ some of those 40 to 50 staff?
Yes, there's a very, very detailed process in the education code as well as the SELPA local plan that talks about the process for staff. And the staff that currently work in those programs have the option to move to be an employee of Lompoc under this plan. And we look at formulas for the number of staff that are involved based on what's in the SELPA local plan. Lots of details. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up on the question. Approximately how many employees is this going to affect?
Yeah, good question. We expect among instructional staff, administrative support staff, administrators, probably between 40 and 50 staff, either in full or in part of their positions. You're welcome.
Thank you so much,
You're
Kirsten.
welcome.
Really appreciate that. And I'll hand this now back to the board. I thought that was an important update that we got in
Yes.
yesterday that I wanted you to be aware of. Yeah, thank you.
That's a big deal. And I appreciate very much being made aware of it as promptly as you did, because we'll start hearing about it shortly, I'm sure. Okay, we'll follow on with the consent agenda. And that includes the issuance of the high school diplomas. And I want to acknowledge Nadra's carrying through with the notes, the cards. I don't know, Joe, if you're still doing the letters, but to have the cards that we sign, that's very special. Thank you, Nadra, for doing that. So I need a motion to approve all consent items, please.
So moved.
Second.
Hearing a first and second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion accepted. The information items 18, 19, and 20, I think Dr. Salcido has addressed. And the personnel report is the standard report. So we'll move right on to item 22, which is Mr. Howell giving a report on the board legal committee meeting.
All right, I'm going to attempt a recap summary, a couple of meetings, and then ask Associate Superintendent Torres to add some information. And this is going to lead us to 2 action items, number 23 and number 24. So a quick recap: on April 5th, the legal committee, which is Judy, Nadra, and Joe, we met and heard from Bridget Boblitz of the need for early childhood education classroom, from Kirsten Escobedo about special ed classroom, and total of 6 to 7 classrooms. There was an immediate need. It seemed, speaking for myself, it seemed pretty overwhelming given the need for the classrooms, the funding sources that we went over, each of which had pretty short fuses. And then we talked about the long-term needs, both in North County, South County. I won't get into those, but the staff really laid out what needed to be done. That was April 5th. Fast forward to June 7th. A much happier conclusion to that meeting. Staff made a lot of progress, and Steve, Bridget, Kirsten, support staff provided us with a couple of opportunities, and this is very nuanced, and I hope to address it. We're going to be asked to take action which is preliminary in its nature, both in a purchase context and a expansion of a lease context. It's a very sequenced process, and the committee received a lot of information. We asked a lot of questions. We got a very robust conversation. So the action today is going to be to authorize staff, superintendent to go forward on these two transactions. The properties are identified in general terms, and they are at item 23, a facility on Broadway. We're not giving addresses. We're not getting into the weeds very intentionally. And then secondly, expanding lease for a facility we now have. What our action, presuming we take the action, we're authorizing a letter of intent. And what's really important, a letter of intent is an agreement to agree. It is not a legally binding document. Again, we are not approving a final definitive purchase agreement to buy a property. Similarly, we're authorizing in number 24, approval to go forward to expand the lease. And as you'll see in item 24, that requires not only our full approval at a later period, but also SELPA JPA has to approve that. So it's important to keep the process going, but being intentionally redundant, we will have another look before we make any final action. So bottom line is critical next steps are our action to approve, enabling staff to proceed in a diligent fashion to propose final action. I'll now, one additional point I asked our council about this. We're all familiar with the Brown Act, and there are a number of very well established basis upon which to have a closed session. One of them is if you're negotiating terms for obvious reasons, you don't have those negotiations in a public context. We will see if and when we need to have a closed session. To do that, it will be noticed and we'll go through the process. It really depends on how this process plays out, whether in fact we need a closed session or whether we will take action on a formal proposal at a future meeting. So I'll now give it to Associate Superintendent Torres. Again, nobody's hiding the ball. We got into great detail at the committee, and fellow committee members can report, we felt like all of our questions were answered. So in general terms, if you have questions, Mr. Torres is the one to answer them. But I hope people understand why we're trying to be forthcoming, but there are limits.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howe. That was an excellent report from legal. I'm going to say it again. This is a very sensitive discussion at this point. We don't want to have a lot of unnecessary conversation out in public about it right now. If the discussions lead to negotiations, we will have a closed session at which we will open the kimono and have all of the details. And again, I'm going to repeat, at this time, we're not committing, we're not authorizing a commitment of anything other than to approve a letter of intent, a non-binding, and recommend discussion, well, going ahead with the okay from SELPA and JPA to work on the expanded lease.
Looking at my notes, one additional point I'm guessing if people think, board members think about very long, a big question. What about funding sources? For item 24, it's actually referenced the cost of the lease paid by districts. Item 23, there are numerous funding sources. Many of them have very specific dates for which they have to be secured and they go away. So that's one of the reasons for prompt action is to maximize these various funding sources. So those have been vetted in great detail and were discussed.
I think I'm just here for questions. Yeah.
Are there any questions, Michelle?
I know that you had a discussion 2 meetings ago, and I just wanted to, I can't remember what was the need, define the need. It was 5 classrooms? 6.
April 5th, in my notes, it was 6 to 7.
6
Correct.
to 7. That was for special ed.
And early childhood education.
Right. Okay. Does that have an impact on the information we received just a little while ago?
This was in the Santa Maria Valley.
Oh,
This-
okay.
This issue, this immediate issue is in services provided within the Santa Maria Valley.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, to move forward. All right, then I am going to ask for a motion to approve item 23.
So move.
Moving to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no, motion passes. And on to number 24, the lease expansion. May I hear a motion?
No motion.
Audra, in a second.
I'll second.
Mary Beth. And all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No. Well, that was good. Thank you very much, Board. We appreciate your understanding that at this time, that's as much as we need to do in order to move forward.
And just, I don't want to beat it to death, but
You are.
it was it was because of the materials they provided and the detail and the questions that committee asked, but there was so much information, and remember thinking, well, what about this? And you turn to the next page and it was answered. So staff did a really excellent job.
Indeed. And now we're going to ask someone we haven't heard anything from today at all. Bridget, would you like to come forward and answer any questions or comments on the school plan for student achievement for the juvenile court and community schools?
This is probably better suited for Renee, but happy to fill in. And then if I need to, I can grab Renee since this is specific to
Either
Fitzgerald
one of
and
you.
court schools.
Either one of you.
So
whatever
this is the
easiest.
school plan for student achievement for 23-24. This is an annual report or plan that is prepared and brought to the board, one for Fitzgerald Community School and one for Dos Puertas. And typically this is sort of created in the year that it is for. So usually you see this around March. Renee and I were speaking, this is a little bit later than usual. Moving forward, the goal will be to have it presented in the fall so that it better aligns with our LCAP. And this is related to our title funding. So the Title I Part D, as well as Title II Part A. So if you have specific questions, we're happy to answer those.
Board have any? Oh,
Michelle.
I was just curious, on page 4 of 31, under the CTE program, they had, let's see, the members gave suggestions on, okay, here we go. Oh, the most, top 5 skills that they're focused on for employability skills. Didn't mention which 5 they were, and I was just curious what the focus is on.
Renee, can you answer that? It's a Renee question, not a Bridget question.
Is it
I'm gonna have her come.
Fine.
for career ready practice standards?
So the employability skills, was that the
Yes,
question?
Because it was a CTE advisory committee and the members gave suggestions on potential strategies and completed a survey where they chose which career ready practice standards, employability skills they feel are most important, resulting in a top 5.
Off at the top of my head?
Okay.
I do not.
That's okay.
I apologize. I
That's
can
okay.
definitely, send those to you.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
If you just include them in an email to the board, that would be
Okay.
great.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
don't have to be put on the
All right.
spot
Sorry about
today.
that. They just caught my attention.
Or to Susan and she'll forward it
Okay.
to the board.
Okay. I just wanted to say it's very nice to see that we have now an expulsion plan countywide that is very appropriate for, especially for the rural schools.
Mhm.
And they don't have a place for these children in independent study, I think is not a very beneficial option for
No.
them. So
No,
I'm
true,
happy
yeah.
to see that we've done so much work on that. Thank you.
Are there any more questions on that? If not, I will look for a motion to approve item 25, please,
Move approval.
and a second.
My second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Motion passes. Yes, Bridget, please.
I'll stand here for a bit,
This is why
just in
I-
case.
This is why I called you up for the other one, because you've got this one and the next one too. Recommend approval of a grant application for consolidated programs. And we have a little bit of information in our book.
So this is also just an annual item, board that we bring forward. It does fund the juvenile court and community schools. It's specific. We apply every year for those 2 types of funding. I think I've said them 3 times today. So Title I, Part D, and Title II, Part A. So this is an annual process that we go through.
And I will move to approve.
And a second, please.
A second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? And the next one is recommend approval of the Santa Barbara County Plan for Expelled Youth.
So this is a triennial plan. So we're starting a new 3-year cycle. And so the last plan that we had was from 21 through 24. And Michelle, I think you were just alluding to this. Yeah. And so this is the plan that we put in place with input from our districts and charter schools on how we're serving students who are expelled. As you know, we serve or have Fitzgerald Community School, which serves the 2 districts here in the Santa Maria Valley through an MOU. We saw a student earlier. There's the Community Day School, Bob Fornash, in Lompoc Unified School District. And then to your point, Michelle, many of our rural schools have their own plans in place on how they're serving expelled youth. And our office works with them if they need alternative ideas or as a thought partner or just to think through placement options for expelled youth. You'll see that most of our elementary schools have 0% of expelled youth, which is great.
Yes, yes. Yes. I am looking for a motion to approve the Santa Barbara County Plan for Expelled Youth.
So moved.
In a second, please.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. You're dismissed.
Okay, well, oh, that's right.
And now we're going to pick on Mr. Torres. Number 28 is a recommendation to approve allowance of attendance because of emergency conditions. If you all remember back to February 5th, it was pretty ugly here in Santa Barbara County. And actually a proclamation of state emergency, and it was followed up by a well, I don't know if they called it a proclamation. Major disaster declaration, and as a result of that, we are allowed to request what am I trying to say? Steve, what am I trying to say? A request for allowance of attendance because of an emergency. So there was paper information about it in the board book, and it lists all the schools and the day that they were closed. Does the board have a question about this? And this, no, our resolution, okay. I get, do we have any questions? We're gonna let Steve off the hook.
Yeah, I recommend approval. Right, I move to approve.
Thank you. All
Second,
those-
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's number 28 is done. And moving on to, oh, I'm sorry, you're still stuck up there for a few more. Number 29, recommendation of approval of the 22-23 Forest Fund Reserve apportionment.
I'll move to approve.
All those in favor?
I second it.
Oh, I guess we need a second first.
And now we can.
Do we need to discuss? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Motion passes. Now we have a recommendation for approval of the use of the 24-25 Proposition 30 Education Protection Account.
And I'll keep rolling here and I'll move to approve.
All those, sorry.
I'll
May I
second.
have a second? Thank you. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that one's done. Thank you very much. There you go. Okay. It's the Forest Reserve and portion of. Okay, the next, I think, 4 items, yes, all pertain to the upcoming election this November. And they're all routine items that we do. They're resolutions, so we'll do roll call votes on them. Resolution 2410 has to do with the governing board member election and notice to consolidate. I'll move to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Mrs. DeWord,
Aye.
Ms. Ehrman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mr. Howell,
Aye.
Mr. Porter.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
And number 32 is a recommendation of adoption of resolution covering conditions set forth for the candidate's statement. And we're designating 200 words this time. So that's a change from what we had in the past. I think we had 400 words in the past. So item number 2 on the resolution says 200 words instead of 400. Again, I need a motion.
I'll motion.
Second.
I'll second.
Discussion. Hearing none. Roll call.
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy.
Aye.
Mrs. DeWord,
Aye.
Ms. Herman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mr. Howell,
Aye.
Mr. Porter.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Item 33 and 34 are specific because of trustee area 4, which goes into San Luis Obispo County and also Ventura County. I think it's out of Cuyama, where Santa Barbara, Ventura, and San Luis County all kind of meet. So it's necessary for us to adopt resolution, an order of election for those two counties. So first of all, we'll do San Luis County. All those in, may I get a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. This is a roll call again.
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Mrs. DeWord,
Aye.
Ms. Erman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mr. Howell,
Aye.
and Mr. Porter.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Same exact thing, only for Ventura County. May I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for the roll call.
Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Mrs. DeWord,
Aye.
Ms. Erman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mr. Howell,
Aye.
and Mr. Porter.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Phew, we're getting there. All right, item 35 is open for a decision on whether we will or will not have a July 11th board meeting. At this time, beyond the regular consent agenda, the other item is the Williams Uniform Complaints Quarterly Report, which can easily be handled in August. So I would ask if there's any objections. How's that? For canceling the July 11th meeting.
Well, I'll make it a motion.
All right.
I move to cancel the July meeting.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We will not meet on July 11th, but we do meet on June 20th, which is next week. And FYI, the items that we will be informed about is a summary presentation of the support of continuous improvement in the districts, the LCAP local indicators report presentation, and the LCAP federal addendum. We'll have to take action on the 24-25 LCAP, which we went through today, and adoption of the 24-25 county school service fund budget, which we also went through today. And one more thing that I can't read. Oh, yes. We're going to have an action item to send an application to FEMA in order to request funds for the damage that was done to the Cathedral Oaks building on February 5th. And we need to do a resolution. So we will be adding that to the agenda for next week. So before I get a motion on number 37, and I know you're all chomping at the bit, it's going to be a dual location meeting in Santa Barbara at the boardroom and here.
Correct.
At 10 a.m. And we'll be using a interesting Zoom where we can talk to each other all together, but it's only in those two locations. It's not zooming out to everybody's home. So you have to pick to be at one of those two locations, please.
Excuse me.
Yes, Michelle.
We skipped over 36, and I I wanted to talk about future agenda items.
All right.
Sorry about that.
I'm chomping at the bit.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I just know there are 3 items outstanding, and I'm just kind of curious why they're not continuous. They're on the consent agenda, but I think they should be carried forward on our agendas. Nadra had asked for an AI presentation. And I think I'd just like to see them, there for the future. And then also we were going to have a discussion about our meeting time. And then also a discussion about a conflict of interest or policy. I was thinking a conflict of interest policy and review and an update.
Okay,
That's all.
thank you for reminding us of that.
Mhm.
Now I will entertain a motion to approve adjournment. Don't all go up.
I move to approve.
Any
I
second,
second.
any discussion? We're done. All right.
Nice job.
5:30.
Thank you.